Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar. I got a bit of a short little video that I wanted to talk about in regards to why the AAA games industry, I really think, at least specifically, should crash and burn. Games are expensive. And, with all the prices jumping up from $60 to $70 to $80 to what I guess people are thinking by the time GTA 6 drops to $100 per game, yeah, it's not looking that pretty. Now, one thing I want to start off with is I don't want to see the console war or any war in the comment section below. There's a lot of moving parts here, and I'm not going to sit here and blame one person or the other. I will, however, throw every one of these companies under the bus right now real quick. Not too long ago, we looked at PlayStation. They jumped their prices up a little bit across the world in special regions for that PlayStation 5. Yes, one of the most boring gaming generations as of right now. Yeah, all of it is going up in prices. Xboxes? Do you know that they're pricing those things up, ladies and gentlemen? How up? Well, if you decide to get the cheapest Xbox Series S, it's going from $300 to $380. You know, you had to do some crazy black magic to get somebody to buy an Xbox in the first place, because we all know how quick those are flying off the store shelves. Yeah, that's just going up. I mean, for some crazy psychopath that thinks a 2 terabyte Galaxy Special Edition is $600 originally, now it's $730, they probably should be shot into the galaxy for thinking this is a reasonable increase. Nintendo Switches, far as Canadian prices go, $629.99, meaning you go to the fucking store, you get the Switch and a game, you're probably looking at, I think $800 at least after taxes in Canadian buckaroonies to go pick up a little handheld Switchy. There's going to be a lot of people who are trying to convince their wives' boyfriends to put that money down. But you know what? Honestly, everything's just getting way more expensive here. And, I used to live at a time where, granted, when the PlayStation 3 dropped, I'm not super old, I'm 31. But, granted, when the PlayStation dropped, it used to be a time when I remember the PS3, it dropped at, I think it was like $600. Motherfuckers had to go and get their kidneys removed to get that PlayStation, okay? That wasn't even getting a game. But obviously, if you waited, as all good things come to those who wait, I guess, you would end up getting a PlayStation, down the road. It would slim up. You get the little Ozempic running through these consoles. They'd slim up. They'd go hit the gym. Bam! You get a cheaper system. And then sometimes they'd really hit the Ozempic gritty. They'd double barrel that into their bodies. You might get a super slim towards the very end of a console generation. It seems like this is the only generation where if you don't buy a system day one, quite literally, 4 or 5 years down the road, you're probably just going to end up paying more across the board, okay? It might be one thing if this was like a pro version of the console, where it was mostly geared towards people that just had an insane amount of money to begin with, or a lot of disposable income. But you're looking at even the cheapest options going up, it ain't looking pretty, okay? I used to recommend buying like a console, like the cheapest console, if you couldn't afford PC gaming. If you didn't, because generally speaking, that Xbox at $300 was not a bad deal if you wanted to play something like GTA 6 day one. Even a computer that could play GTA 6 on launch would probably not cost you $300 at the time to run it, even at its most minimum settings, okay? Unless you really stretched your dollars and sought a sale. That's not the world we live in, ladies and gentlemen, with how wild supply chains and how wild tariffs have become. It's an entire hobby that's become exponentially more expensive as time has effectively gone on. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about more specifically before we go back to the hardware stuff, which actually really isn't the fault for a lot of these companies, is the increase to that $80 game. Now, recently I was at the Xbox website, and around May 1st they announced some pricing updates. Oh boy, let's read the pricing update. So some of our new first-party games will launch at $79.99 beginning this holiday season. So, beginning of this holiday season, Microsoft is, expecting that, yeah, those AAA big-budget games we're launching, they're going to be $80. So what kind of games you imagine? Probably Call of Duty, let's be completely real here. And, one of the things that I've learned in the gaming circle is when you're on the internet, you're a very loud vocal minority. In reality, every time I go to a GameStop or something and I see somebody pick up a copy of Call of Duty, pick up a copy of Madden, pick up a copy of NBA, which, bro, at this point, the game might as well be a fucking casino you go to on Vegas with a basketball minigame attached to it. All right, yeah, those are still being sold like crazy. These games are hilarious because if you go to their like user reviews, it's like 3 out of 10. Like the people buying this shit feel like they're purchasing actual dog water, but yet they still buy it. You know, it's like the amount of people that complain about the Switch 2 prices, and it's like, I'm not going to go get a Switch. Then you immediately read the next day, oh my God, it broke all pre-order records. Bro, that's why the industry is allowed to get away with fisting you pretty much without any lube at any given time, okay? Because people just can go and buy it. Now, when it comes to the increase in video game prices, one of the things that obviously leads to that increase, like why a video game went from $50 to 60 to 70 to 80, is there is a genuine truth to video games getting more expensive to produce, right? So for instance, let's say that you're somebody that wants to play like the new GTA, right? Like if we look at it from a mathematical perspective, like Red Dead Redemption 2 cost them $170 to $240 million Rockstar to make. That doesn't include the extra $200 to $300 million it cost for the budget for the marketing. So let's just look at the cost for just the payment of developing the game. That's almost $250 million. Now, if you go back to San Andreas, which is a far simpler game in comparison to the heavy hitter that is Red Dead 2, from just a technical perspective, it would cost Rockstar at the time, I believe, if you adjusted for inflation, $15 to $23 million. So that's how much money you're looking at for developing the game. And obviously the marketing is effectively double that. But yeah, games are just substantially more expensive to produce. It's kind of crazy when you look at the development and time for a video game. It kind of rivals that of like some of the most insane Hollywood masterpieces. Like AAA gaming is such an expensive behemoth because teams have jumped from tens of gamers, tens of programmers, tens of developers to hundreds of developers, artists, individuals that are doing tons of different jobs to create our different video games that we all know and love, okay? To conceive making a video game is not something that starts, in like year 1. It starts year 1 and probably ends like year 7. Like realistically looking at a game like GTA 6, for how impressive that it is and how much we all gawked over it, I'm sure that the game is probably a concept since GTA 5, and since then, development has sort of happened. There has been an actual paper trail, a receipt for development beginning probably since then. And obviously that ramps up as the years progress, but ultimately it's a game that costs hundreds of millions of dollars to make. And obviously for a game company, it's not the day where they exclusively develop games for one console. No, in order to make your money back, you got to be developing for everything. PlayStation, Xbox, phones even, PCs, everything. And everything has to hit on every cylinder for you to make as much money back as quickly as you can, and hope to God that if your game has some live service component, probably also starts generating hundreds of millions of dollars every year. That's just how expensive a video game, and that's how expensive the demands have gotten. So sometimes a video game is successful. Like obviously nobody's going to say that Red Dead 2 was a failure. Obviously very successful for Rockstar. But there's also games that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to produce. Games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is one of my favorite games, but if you ask Square Enix, obviously I'm sure it wasn't the most, selling game in their mind. It wasn't the game that met expectations. In fact, it apparently failed to meet expectations. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that they released it exclusively on a PlayStation 5. It was the second part of a trilogy, a pretty popular trilogy, mind you, but generally speaking, those sales do tend to drop off. And when you have like a 50-hour commitment for the previous game requirement to go into the next one, yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of people that are probably going to skip or at least wait until everything is out in a convenient like $60 package down the road in like 2030. So yeah, it's a tough industry to kind of be in, and it seems like it's getting more difficult for the AAA people. Now, if you ask me personally, I think that for most games, I was reading somewhere that I think it was over 90% of PC gamers are playing older games. And while this is skewed with people playing stuff like Roblox, Fortnite, Grand Theft Auto Online, games that are regularly updated, but obviously released probably a decade ago at worst, yeah, those games are still obviously very popular. But I think for a lot of older games, like me personally, dog, I've been playing so much MGS Phantom Pain. I've been playing Arkham Knight again, a game that might as well, I think it's basically almost a decade old at this point. A lot of these older games, in my opinion, just kind of hit harder. Like, there are 30-hour games with, 30-hour worth of experiences, and they don't stretch longer than they need to. You know, I haven't played Assassin's Creed Shadows beyond the initial like 2 weeks. I haven't even finished that game because while I enjoyed 10 hours of its gameplay, I didn't want to do that 10 hours 10 times over repetitively just to see a credit screen roll through. And honestly, I think the AAA industry is probably more so threatened by the fact that games like Expedition 33 exist that have released at price tags under $60, made by a group of 30 people that has actually gotten like 2 million sales in what, like 10 days that it's been out? It's fucking crazy to see like some success happen that's not in the AAA space when a game company comes out and produces an actual masterpiece that resonates with gamers versus just being like an open world checklist slog that you're basically digging through. Because if anything, I feel like I've been kind of talking about the game industry crashing, and honestly, when it comes to the AAA side, I am so fucking ready to see this industry crash. Simply because if anything needs to be reset, it's probably those bloated AAA development budgets. It's probably the expectation of this industry that if gamers are expected to pay $80, shouldn't the quality also go up beyond just shinier graphics? Shouldn't games be taking real advantage of the hardware we provide them and hardware genuinely advancing? Like, these are things that, honestly, if the industry isn't willing to address, there's a real big black pill here, right? Gamers only have a limited amount of money to be spending every year. If you're going to be telling somebody who can only afford like, what, 3 games now if they're priced at 80 or maybe $100 a pop, they're going to be having to pick. If they're going to pick between AAA people, they're probably going to look at GTA 6 first and maybe the extra 2 games. So really, these companies are kind of, you know, putting competition between each other at a much more intense pace. And that's not something I think is absolutely sustainable down the road. Companies like EA, Activision, Ubisoft, hell, even Rockstar, a lot of these companies are really going to be having to put each other on the chopping block. They're really competing with each other at the end of the day. Because when it comes to things like indie gaming, for me, indie gaming is pretty much where I'm at these days. Like, I've been playing a lot of this one game, Cubic Odyssey. Like, the demo came out, really been enjoying it. Games like No Man's Sky have obviously been attracting me as many times as it's updated. But even from a single-player perspective, games like Signalis, which cost me a fraction of a $60 game, but give me hours of actual fun gameplay, memorable gameplay, is the kind of stuff that I actually end up chasing. Especially as a lot of AAA companies are kind of relying more on remakes to kind of stave off these development budgets as time goes on. I really feel like it's the indie market, you know, the market where games are 20, 30 bucks a pop, but they give you actual hundreds of hours of gameplay is where things are really important. Why would I choose to buy another tactical shooter when a game like Ready or Not exists for a similar but smaller price tag, yet gives me actual hundreds of hours of gameplay that I can play with myself or cooperatively with other people? It's a weird industry, and honestly, the prices going up is literally them just competing with each other. And I think that's going to become very apparent come 2026, when games are probably going to be priced at least $80, maybe $100 a pop, and these companies are absolutely going to have to be fighting with each other for the actual gamer's dime at that point. Now, there's a lot of greed that I think companies are pretty responsible for when it comes to like the industry, right? Like, let's be real. When a game jumps to $80 on a digital perspective, it's probably due to the fact that in some way, I think gaming companies have to find a way to make sure that their hardware can kind of make up. So generally speaking, in a lot of cases, most hardware companies, like whether it be like Microsoft, PlayStation, or Nintendo, generally it'll be the hardware sold at a break even. Maybe you make a little bit of money on it, or sometimes it can be sold at cost, right? So let's say that it takes you, I don't know, $350 to make a console. You sell it at like $300, and your expectation is somebody probably buys a controller or they buy a game to make up for it. So I really feel like hardware is where most of the pain is really coming from. Now, to give you an idea, guys, there is a lot of panic due to tariffs, due to like massive issues around the world, where one of the companies in the world, one of the biggest hardware companies, Apple. Now, these guys don't make gaming consoles, but you can definitely game on a MacBook. You can game on an iPhone these days. You can play Resident Evil 4 Remake on the most up-to-date iPhones. But let's say you go and pick up the new iPhone 16 Pro Max, okay? Don't really know this naming scheme, but for $1,200, okay, I used to think phones back in the day, if they priced it at this, should suck my cock. Now, back in the day, you had things like the iPhone 3G. Now, this senior citizen of technological design, you know, I was basically playing like, what, Flash game style things on this? You know, really tiny thing as compared to a modern iPhone, all right, which is significantly larger, significantly faster, and you can play actual RE4 Remake on this, which I think is actually kind of insane that a handheld device is doing it. But a lot of that comes from the chips within this. The same chips, the same design, the same computer semiconductors that power our consoles exist in our GPUs, our phones. It's a pretty common thing amongst medical equipment, military equipment, really anything electronic comes and requires chips. So a lot of companies like Apple, Nvidia, Tesla, Microsoft, a lot of these big tech companies fight for the factory time of one company specifically known as TSMC. Now, this is an aerial shot of TSMC in Arizona. Now, TSMC is a company from Taiwan, and they basically, from my understanding, produce 90% of the chips internationally. So to give you a rough idea, companies like Apple or like companies like AMD or whoever produces the CPUs and GPUs for a lot of our consoles and cell phones and like cars, everything imaginable, typically they have, people in their companies that spend millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. Hell, it can go up to like $1 billion from time to time, creating and basically designing chips, right? So roughly you'll use EDA tools. You basically design a chip. And then once you have a design pretty much thought after, your real confidential design, companies like this will go to TSMC or these fabricators. Basically, the largest fabricator is TSMC. They'll tell them, hey, listen, we need you to make this chip. Now, the reason why TSMC is so important is that A, production of chips is really difficult. Like, I think TSMC spends somewhere like 100 billion US dollars to open up like 2 plants. So it's A, an expensive thing to go down with, but the process of building a computer chip is insane. Okay, so to give you an idea, you need to go get silicon first. In fact, producing a computer chip, I think like a professor of mine put it the best way, you can't ever call somebody dumb as rocks, because we as a human species has basically, we've found a way to get rocks to think. Basically, you go out, you get silicon, you get like ultra pure silicon, this ingot, you slide it into very, very thin discs, okay? Very thin discs we call wafers. Using technology like photolithography, okay, we basically take these designs and find out how to etch them onto actual silicone. And after a whole bunch of different chemical treatments, we have magically found a way to turn a rock into a very complicated piece of circuitry that is used in most of the technology we use out there. In fact, thanks to that technology, you're able to watch a fat Indian guy tell you about this process over a high-definition video on the internet, okay? That's how crazy this shit is. So because of things like tariffs, right, on a lot of these semiconductors coming out of China, or Taiwan specifically, it has basically put the United States in a pretty precarious situation. So on one hand, you can be annoyed at the tariff, but to look at it in the most charitable fashion, it's a way for America to effectively force its industries to start producing these chips locally. And it's not to say that locally chips can't be made. Like, there's other fabricators other than TSMC, like Intel. I believe Samsung is also pretty good at fabrication. There are other fabricators, like I think Texas Instruments, but making a computer chip is a very, very specialized field. And it requires very, very intelligent people and very expensive pieces of technology to create these things at the scales we want them. So for Apple, this basically costs, them apparently around $900 million in a hit onto their actual sheets once you factor in tariffs down the road. So every company, Microsoft, Nvidia, Apple, are basically scrambling to move their chains to places where they can minimize this bill as much as they can. So it's one of the reasons why games and, game products have gotten significantly more expensive, and that's probably the only part of this entire puzzle where I can look at these companies and say that's not actually greed, that's more of them actually trying to figure out how the fuck we're going to be avoiding a really expensive slap to the face. But generally speaking, the AAA games industry, to kind of highlight this back into what it needs to be, I really think that needs to crash. Games are getting to $80 price tags a pop as of this holiday. And by the time next year comes around, by the time GTA 6 drops, I actually don't really doubt that games might even be $100 US a pop by then. And honestly, in a field where I think that a whole bunch of indie games have sort of spiked up and sort of come out and basically gotten the attention of gamers, there is no better time to be, in my opinion, an indie game developer and sell games for a fraction of the AAA industry's cost, especially when a lot of these guys, maybe they're not making the most prettiest looking game in comparison, but playing a game like Schedule 1 or Shadows of Doubt or Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a very pretty looking game, but obviously it's not a big AAA release. Playing games like that over at least what the industry is still producing, these open world slogs that are supposed to be 100-hour adventures that realistically get boring after 5 or 10 hours. Yeah, I think it's a great way for indie gamers to really shine up, indie games to really shine up, and be basically the place where gamers spend most of their time putting their hours into. I feel like a lot of this industry really aims to create the next big like live service product. And even in the AAA space, you see so much shit like the constant overuse of artificial intelligence, it seems, in massive projects like Call of Duty, to the point where it feels like, yes, the project is big, the project is bloated, the project may look nice, but ultimately, I don't think it's worth that $80 price tag, and I know that it's not worth that $80 price tag, and I know for a lot of you gamers watching, it definitely isn't even close to the $80 fucking price tag. But yeah, indie gamers, man, I don't think that industry is ever going to die anytime soon. I think for all of it's considered, indie gaming is probably the only thing keeping gaming alive, safe, and secure. And I do absolutely envision a crash of the AAA industry, where when you got games like Grand Theft Auto 6 vying for the same attention that other $80 games are now asking for, maybe $100 down the road, I feel like it's not going to be just Ubisoft that's facing the music. I think it's going to be companies like Square Enix that are spending millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on every big project, when realistically they don't even need to. Realistically, it should be that their projects are, priced appropriately to produce, and they make millions, down the road. Games like FF7 Rebirth should not be financial, like, underperformers. They should just be better produced games, or more intelligently produced games at this point, too. But I think it's going to require more of these big publishers to crash or ultimately downsize their projects before the industry kind of gets it, okay? Like, it's just a wild place we're in, man. Shit is just so goddamn expensive these days, and it doesn't, in my opinion, really need to be. I think if anything, gamers have shown that if you just price something at like 20, 30 bucks and have a game like budgeted accordingly to that price tag for production, I think gamers are more likely to give you money down the road for a product that is better produced, better respectful of the gamer. And ultimately, even looking at something like Obscure 33, they've been able to do something that I don't even think modern Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest or really any of the big AAA houses have even been able to accomplish. But that's just where my thoughts are, ladies and gentlemen. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.